Welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me. And it's New Year's Eve, so I thought for one more video I'll do something a little bit special, and then we'll get back to our regular programming of teaching you guys everything that I've learned along the way. So I have driven over 100,000 miles, about 160,000 kilometers through 55 countries on 4 continents. And people always ask, what was your favorite part? And it's impossible to just list one favorite. I've seen so many different mountain ranges, rivers, lakes, oceans. I've met so many friendly people and tried so many different types of street food. It's impossible to just try and distill it down to one or two things. So instead, what I do is I talk about the defining experiences that I've had along the way. And we've all had a pretty rough 2020. None of us have really been able to go anywhere. We can't visit family. And it's been really fun actually going back through my old photos and videos in the last couple of videos to show you guys, what I saw along the way. And it's inspiring me to look forward, hopefully, to getting out in 2021 and to find new adventures around the world. And so I thought in today's video, I'll try and inspire you guys and show you the reasons that I go overlanding around the world. This is what motivates me to put in all that effort and make these trips come to life. So as I talk, I'll put up photos. When I was on the Pan American Highway, that was long before I got into YouTube. And in fact, I only filmed one video for the whole trip. So let's dive right into it. The Pan American Highway, I'd been dreaming of Alaska for so long since I was a little boy. And I thoroughly loved Alaska. Saw so many bears and moose. I saw the Northern Lights. I saw beautiful stars, the Arctic Ocean. But I was looking the whole time to do something that was like really epic Alaska. And so I drove down to Valdez, which is the end of the Alaska pipeline, and I paid to go on a kayaking trip. And I kayaked around icebergs that had carved off the Columbia Glacier. So this is an enormous glacier. It's really difficult to understand the scale. And to paddle around these icebergs, it was one of the most surreal and otherworldly experiences I've ever had in my entire life. Even sitting here today, it's easily top 10 of my life. Just to be out there like that was so beautiful. It's difficult to describe the peacefulness of these enormous chunks of ice as they drift around. So paddling with icebergs in Alaska really rates up there things I've ever done in my life. On a similar vein, when I got down into Central America, there starts to be active volcanoes. And so just outside Antigua in Guatemala, it's actually a common thing to do. They run day trips up to Volcan Pacaya, which is an active volcano. And so I jumped in a little tour bus and they drove us up there, and hiking up this volcano, it's super hot, it's dusty, the rocks are really dry. And then suddenly you look across and there is a river of flowing lava. And I mean close. I could have just walked right over and put my foot in it if I wanted to. Obviously that would be a really stupid thing to do. But to be that close and realize that the earth is alive in that way, unbelievable experience. And to feel the heat wafting off the lava. My shoes started melting to the rocks. I roasted a marshmallow on the lava. And one of the coolest things I did, I guess I'm still an engineering nerd, I picked up a small rock and I just threw it into the river of lava. And it was fascinating to watch. It actually sat on top of the lava. I guess there's like a little bit of a skin, even though the lava was glowing red. And it took maybe 10 or 20 seconds to kind of melt down until it was fully in there. Just an incredible experience to watch it sliding by. And I stayed up there as late as I could until the sun went down, and to realize so much of the mountain around me was glowing red. That again is another top 10 experience of my life that I'll never forget. Further south, when I was in Bolivia, my mind was blown once again. And I always say about Bolivia, it's a country on earth that is unlike any other. So, once I got down into Patagonia, I said, oh yeah, these mountains look a lot like Alaska. Or when I was on the beach in Mozambique, I said, this looks a lot like a beach in Costa Rica, or, so on and so forth. Places always have sort of similar places to compare to, but Bolivia is not like that. Once you're in the Altiplano, you're up at really high elevation looking at mountains. I've never seen anything like that on Earth. And the place that really stands out is the salt flats of Bolivia. And I teamed up with some other overlanders, and together we drove across the salt flats, we camped out on them for a night, and then drove into the Atacama Desert and way through remote southern Bolivia, and then eventually we found our way into Chile. And for me at the time, that was the most remote I'd ever been in my whole life. That was the real expedition for the first time. Had to rely on all our own fuel and food and water. And it was unbelievably rewarding to know that, you know, there's pretty high stakes game out there. If something goes wrong, you're on your own. But it really excited me, and it really drove my passion to getting more and more wild and more remote. And actually, it's one of the main reasons that I started looking into Africa, realizing that I wanted to get as remote as possible. I figured Africa was the right place to do that. And then once I finally got into Africa, there's no doubt about it, there were just so many moments where I had to pinch myself and I just didn't believe what I was looking at was real. Seeing the gorillas in Uganda is a great example of that. The silverback gorilla, you know, the example I always say is that when Arnold Schwarzenegger was a bodybuilder, and he was my idol for a while, he weighed about 240 pounds. He's about 6'2". So, you know, he's a big guy as far as human beings go. But the silverback gorilla here that was about 10 feet away from me, he weighs 500 pounds. So his shoulders are just that much bigger. His head is maybe 4 times bigger than mine. And he's so unbelievably strong. The gorilla reached up and snapped off a stick of bamboo to eat. And then after he'd moved away, I went over there. I couldn't even bend the bamboo by hanging all of my body weight off that same stick. So unbelievable amount of power. And to be so close to them in their environment, to see their facial expressions, to see how they interact with each other, I actually was elbowing the guy next to me for the whole time and just saying like, I don't believe this is real. This looks like computer CGI. You know, I'm watching a movie right now. The silverback gorillas is easily top #1 wildlife experience of my life. Nothing I don't think will ever come close. When I talk about getting really wild and remote, what stands out to me, I mean, West Africa alone is one of the hardest places to overland in the world. Nigeria, Cameroon, Gabon, the 2 Congos, Angola. These are not commonly visited places on Earth. Not so many tourists have traipsed through. And in fact, I crossed a border where the border guard said he'd never seen a foreigner in 3 years. So it gives you an idea of how remote you can still get in Africa if you want to. But for me, the real pinnacle of all of that was crossing the big Congo. It was crossing the DRC. And so it can be a dangerous place, especially in the eastern side of the country. But I was in the west, and driving in, it just felt like nowhere else I've ever been on Earth. It really did feel like I went back in time 100 years. There was no trash on the ground simply because there's nowhere to buy trash. So you couldn't buy a Coca-Cola even if you wanted to. Maybe it's the only place I've ever been that's like that. And so the people are unbelievably joyous and friendly. Even fully grown men were jumping up and down in excitement when they saw us. Children would group around and just stare at us for hours and hours. And the more I traveled through the Congo, you know, it got wild. There were deep river crossings. There was a lot of mud. And one of my favorite things was helping out locals who were stuck in the mud. So they drive really old, crappy vehicles that were always broken down. And so we would pull out our winches, we would pull out our straps and get them out of the mud. And every time the people would come over to us and shake our hands and say thank you. And I think it really helped everyone, us and them, to see that we're all in this together. And if we work together, we can all get through these really difficult circumstances as a team. You know, it doesn't help to try and go it alone. It helps if we all work together. And so for me, the Congo, I mean, it absolutely fascinates me. And I'm half excited to try and mount an expedition to drive right across the entire country. I'm like 50% excited about that, and I'm 50% terrified about it because it is dangerous. Bad things do happen, and it would be further off the map maybe than you can get anywhere on the entire planet. But for me, driving across the Congo, easily the biggest adventure of my life so far. In terms of wildlife, Botswana and Zambia and Zimbabwe, they are simply incredible for the amount of wildlife you can see. So it starts to be a regular occurrence that you just see elephants and giraffes. And I don't even mean when you're in a national park. I mean when you're just driving along a regular road and suddenly there's a herd of elephants crossing. There was probably 10 mornings where when I woke up upstairs in my Jeep, I would unzip the canvas and come eye to eye with a herd of giraffes who were maybe like 30 or 40 yards away. And most mornings they would kind of look at me for a while and then they just go back to eating their trees, and I could sit there for half an hour watching them. So unbelievable wildlife experiences. I got so close to lions that I was afraid to put the window down. They were less than 6 feet away from where I was sitting in the driver's seat. And these kinds of things, you know, the first handful of times they happen, they just shock you and it's terrifying. But believe it or not, you actually start to get used to it, and it starts to be like, oh yeah, look, there's another lion, or that makes sense, you know, there's another leopard. And even sitting here now, you know, I'm in Canada, there's snow outside. It doesn't feel like real life, but I assure you that it is. You can fly to Botswana, you know, once COVID is over, fly over to Botswana and you will see elephants on the first day. It's essentially guaranteed. That's how dense the wildlife is when you go to those amazing parts of the world. And then for me, the final one that I need to talk about is when I drove to the pyramids in Egypt. And so I kind of had seen them as the logical endpoint for the expedition for quite a while. Once it became obvious I couldn't drive across Libya and Algeria to get back to Morocco, Egypt just became the natural endpoint. And so for me, arriving at the pyramids was this huge sort of emotional release of, I finally did it. I achieved my goal through all of the hard days, through all of the joy days, and everything in between. I had been looking forward to getting to those pyramids. And so it was a huge achievement. And in fact, not many people know this, my Africa dream took almost a decade. From the days that I first started dreaming about it and doing some research and thinking, then saving money, preparing the Jeep, finally getting to Africa, doing the entire trip and then getting back again, that was right on 9.5 years of effort. So you can imagine when you undertake something that takes a decade of your life, it feels pretty good when you get to the end and it feels like an amazing achievement. But of course it's bittersweet as well because it meant that my trip was coming to an end and I was going to have to figure out what am I going to do next with my life. So in a funny sense, it's a great achievement, but it's also sort of leaves me feeling a bit hollow and empty, and it starts to fill me up for like, where am I going next? What's next on my list of world places to see? So I know we're all kind of stuck at home for 2020, and I hope these photos and these stories have helped inspire you and helped realize that there is a big, beautiful world out there and we can all work hard and hopefully get back to traveling in 2021. So I'd love to hear about where you're thinking about going next. Let me know down in the comments what are in your dreams and where do you recommend that I should start looking at to go. And I am working really hard towards an expedition for 2021. It's really difficult with so many international borders being closed. I'm having a hard time locking in one particular trip, but I'm getting close and I feel pretty confident that something is going to happen. I am wary though. I don't want to be that guy who says he's going to do a particular trip and then doesn't do it. So I would much rather be a guy who just does things rather than spends all his time talking about what he's going to do. So with that said, I again need to say a huge thanks to my supporters on Patreon. These people, for as little as $2 a month, they're helping me bring these videos to life and they're getting special perks. People get my books, they got Christmas postcards, they get stickers and patches, and my GPS tracks from some of my trips are available. And I'm working on more perks for my Patreon supporters too. So if you're thinking about being a supporter, check out the link down in the description, head on over to Patreon and let me know what else you would like to see as a perk. I'm always open to new ideas. What can I give you supporters to express my thanks and as a reward for helping to support me? So thanks again so much for watching. I hope you've had a great 2020 and fingers crossed we can all get out and explore more in 2021. So until next year, which is coming up pretty soon here, stay safe out there and let's look forward to lots of new adventures.